That's a great transition to Dina Kaplan. Dina is a great entrepreneur who founded a company called Blip. And she stopped for 1 year. So she didn't stop for 6 minutes like we just did. She stopped for 1 year. And she's been all around the world. And I asked Dina if she would be up to tell us a story and why she did this. And here's Dina. Welcome, Dina.
Thank you. Hi. I look forward to speaking with you today about fear. My fear. Excuse me while we wait for the slides. 1 second. This is the greatest thing to happen if you're giving a talk about fear. The click. Thank you. We'll start over. Hi. I look forward to speaking with you today about fear. This is the intersection of Broome and Lafayette in downtown Manhattan. It may look familiar to some of you. On November 4th, 2001, I was standing at this intersection, and I needed to cross just 1 block east and 1 block south to get to work. And yet, I couldn't do it. Nobody who saw me, all dressed up, with my hair done and makeup on, would have guessed that I was afraid to cross the street. But first, tell me a little bit about fear. I'm curious to know from you guys, how many of you have thought about fear and the role it plays in your life? Whether it's an external fear like heights or bugs, or an internal fear like a fear of failure. Show me with a raise of hands, how many of you have thought about fear? Wow, I see a lot of hands. I'm impressed. You guys are a lot further along than I was 2 years ago. So who was that girl standing at that intersection? I was like many of you. I was a LeWeb person, a thriving entrepreneur. I founded the startup called Blip back in 2005. Blip is the place for web series, for the best original shows on the web. When we launched Blip, I started working nonstop. I was the entrepreneur who had given birth, essentially, to my first internet child, and it was all I thought about, all I talked about, and all I dreamt about. I worked every night, I worked every weekend, and I did nothing else. I was that girl if I did take a vacation. For example, I took a bike trip with my family in Puglia, the heel of the boot in Italy. But I brought my cell phone with me, and at every red light, I would pull my phone out from my jacket and not just look at, but I would respond to every single solitary incoming email, forwarding documents to people, getting lawyers' opinions on things, giving some quotes on the record for the press, and then I would put my phone back in my bike jacket, race to the next red light, and do the whole thing all over again. I was super fun to be with. For most of my time at the company, I was the COO, head of operations. So I was running the whole business side of the company. I was also managing 6 departments: PR, HR, business development, finance, marketing. Now, in addition to the operations, I was also the public face of the company. So pretty much every single day for the history of the company, I was doing press, and I was giving talks and speaking on panels to promote the company. You know, I did get to do some cool things. Fortune named me one of the most powerful women entrepreneurs in the country, so I got to spend some time with Warren Buffett, and I promise you, he shocked me and a ton of photographers in the room when he got down on one knee one day. You know, I was really passionate about the emerging startup ecosystem in New York, so I started an event series called Founders Club to promote and support all the top startups in the city. So to do this, I threw these big events, and everyone from Mayor Bloomberg to Jimmy Fallon to Rupert Murdoch would come. I was also really passionate about women entrepreneurs, so I started another event series called Calliope Group to promote and support the top female entrepreneurs on the East Coast. You know, I share all this not to sound boastful or too American, if we can say that those are two different things, hopefully, but to give you, to basically paint a picture for you of how I looked from the outside. I looked fearless. But the truth is, and I hope Loic and Geraldine won't be mad at me for saying this on stage, but the truth is, excuse my French, it was all bullshit. The reality is that I was full of fear. I wasn't mindful of it then, but fear was holding me back in every area of my life. So the company was growing at this point. The content team was doubling and then tripled in size, the same with tech, the same with sales. All of a sudden, within a few years, we had 75 people at the company and $10 million in the bank. And yet, I was still running operations and doing all of the public-facing work, and I was managing 6 departments by myself. I didn't have one direct report. And wait, was this even smart for me or for the company? I was super stressed. But I realize now, I wasn't mindful of it then, but I realize now that I was afraid to ask for help. I was afraid of what that would mean, that maybe people would think, even within my company, that I wasn't capable. I was afraid that I had an inner fear, too. I was afraid that I didn't deserve a staff. This would be all the more devastating because my dad is actually a pretty famous professor from Harvard Business School that some of you might know of, who is also a management expert. Eeks, I didn't want him to not be proud of his daughter. You know, I had no women role models to look up to, other women founders, so I defaulted to emulating men. I was constantly thinking, what would Larry or Sergey do? Sometimes at work, when you're stressed, if you're a girl, if we can admit this, you might want to cry. But I was afraid to be girly at work, so I always held back my tears. In fact, I suppressed every single emotion that I felt. You know, I was held up as this model woman entrepreneur, but the truth is that I kind of felt like an actress playing a role of entrepreneur. I was afraid I didn't never have the confidence to be myself, to be relaxed or silly or authentic. I think what this was imposter syndrome, which some of you may be familiar with. I think there was a part of me that worried I didn't deserve to be where I was. And so I sabotaged some opportunities. Sheryl Sandberg emailed me one night. She said, Dina, I want to get to know you better. Will you please schedule an appointment with me and come spend some time with me the next time you're in California? She CC'd her assistant, so that's how you know that she really means it. But I thought, she must not really mean this. If I go visit her in the Bay Area, she'll probably think that I'm wasting her time. And so I never scheduled the appointment. One of my closest friends was one of the founders of the Guilt Group. I had all these founder friends through all of these events that I was throwing and part of. But I was actually concerned that they didn't really like me, so I never asked them out ever. We would only get together because they would send the incoming requests to me. But all this pales in comparison to what came next. I started having what would probably be called panic attacks. At the height of one of them, I would feel really scared. I would feel flush, and I'd feel like I was about to faint. I lived in fear of passing out in the middle of a New York City intersection. And so I started taking cabs everywhere. My walk to work was a beautiful walk from the West Village through Greenwich Village to Soho, about 12-minute walk, but I took a cab every single morning, $8 wasted dollars a day, $2,000 wasted dollars a year on a startup salary. And so we go back to Broome and Lafayette. On that November day, I did what I always did, was standing at the intersection, and I was looking for someone to make eye contact with. This is what I would do. Try to make eye contact with someone in the hope that we would establish enough of a connection that if when we walked across the street and if I were to pass out, they would pick my body up off the ground so I wouldn't get crushed by cabs. And in that moment, on that November day, I decided this wasn't worth it. My everything was the company, but that everything had to change. And I did something very bold for this ambitious, hardworking girl. I quit my job, and I booked a one-way ticket to Indonesia. I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew I had to get out of there. So I started traveling. I traveled to Singapore, Indonesia, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. This is the Lipton tea plantations in Sri Lanka. And it's funny, I had fun, but I fell back into my old entrepreneurial pattern. I was gunning 1,000 miles a minute. Rather than optimizing for gross margins at this point, which is what I was used to, I was racking up countries as credentials and posting the results on Facebook. Yes, I was that girl with the endlessly cool vacation photos. But this is my friend Patrick. Patrick is a successful entrepreneur from San Francisco, and for years he had been trying to tell me two things. One, to meditate. Two, to face my fears. I ignored both of these. But then we met up to travel in Bhutan and Myanmar. This is actually us in Bhutan. We're about to turn around and go hike up that mountain that's right behind us. So when we were traveling together, he got a little harder to ignore. We started meditating every day. Just being, rather than filling my head with all of these new experiences and distractions, meant that I couldn't, for the first time, seek fulfillment from somebody else. This was a huge step on my path to mindfulness. On our last day in Myanmar, Patrick said, look, you can continue to try to learn from other people, or you can take some time, study meditation, and learn to learn from yourself. And so I did it. I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat to study meditation. For someone that always sought approval from other people, who always got their validation from others, this was hard and it was painful. There was no escaping myself. I wanted to quit on day 1 and on days 2 and 3 too. But then on day 8, I had a huge realization. I figured out what my driver was. Like a light bulb going off, I realized that my entire life, I was obsessed with being liked. It all stems from this experience in summer camp when I was 9 years old. I was bullied. They didn't call it that back then, but that's essentially what it was, and it was really bad. And I made a vow to myself that summer that I would hone my social skills so finely that I would never be the reject again. I would always be popular. And I did. My whole life, I've collected people, and I've always been surrounded by friends. But there was a cost to it. I was never authentic. I never said what was on my mind. I only said what I thought people wanted to hear. So this was another big step on my path to mindfulness. I realized in this moment that I'd been acting in fear my entire time at Blip. I didn't ask for help because I didn't want to upset people or cause any trouble. And so I just piled on more work rather than being strategic or rocking the boat. You know, always guessing what people wanted to hear from me was exhausting too. It was a habit for my life, but in this moment, during this meditation retreat, I realized that that habit didn't serve me. I wanted to break it, but I had no idea how you break a pattern of your personality. And this is when Patrick's words about fear came back to me. I did have a number of physical fears that I'd held my entire adult life, and I wondered, if I started breaking or overcoming those physical fears, those habits, would that translate into the rest of my life? If I could conquer my physical fears, could I then go on to conquer my internal fear? I decided to try, but if I was going to do this, I had to start with a big one. Okay, not this guy who's pretty cute, but scuba diving. When I was growing up, someone had died on my very first scuba diving trip. We'd flown over to the Bahamas, to this beautiful resort with another family, and my dad and I went out scuba diving with this other family, mom, dad, 2 daughters, the same ages as my sister and me. We went out for the dive, but the father of the other family never came up, ever. For the next few days, as we were hanging out in the resort, we could see the daughters and the mom walking along the beach, looking out to the water, wondering what had happened to their father. And we flew back with this family, daughters, mom, one empty seat on the flight for the dad. It was a scarring experience, and I thought, somebody out there did not intend for me to scuba dive. I am never going scuba diving. But I was committed to breaking my life patterns, and I wanted to conquer this fear. With my instructor, Joe, at my side, I went on my first dive. And it was an incredible experience. I was super afraid right when we went in the water, but once we got in, I felt okay. And when I came out of the water, I felt different. I felt lighter. For the first time, I had finally done something not to win the approval of anyone else, but I had done something for me. And you know, there's actually research that shows that if you do new experiences, if you break patterns, you can actually create, you have neuroplasticity in your brain, and you can actually change the shape of your brain. It is possible to create more gray matter in your brain. And when you create new neural pathways, it opens you up to new experiences. I decided I had this new experience and I loved it. Scuba diving is now one of my favorite activities in the world. This is me at the Great Barrier Reef 9 months after that first dive. So as I traveled, I continued to conquer fear. Another huge one, zip lining. So I went to northern Laos and actually moved into a treehouse. This is the view from the treehouse, 40 meters above the ground, where you had to put a harness on for your whole day and zip line, even literally, to get home. But I had a huge fear left, bungee jumping, lifelong fear. I was on my way with a group of friends to Queenstown, New Zealand, capital of adventure in the world, and everyone signed up to bungee jump. My friends all go, they sign up, they get weighed, and they jump, and I stalled, literally in a bathroom stall for an hour. I locked myself in, I stared at a roll of toilet paper, and I wondered, is this the last roll of toilet paper I'll ever see? Why have I never appreciated toilet paper before? When I finally walked out to the bridge, I still delayed. I asked question after question after question. And then I stood out there on that bridge that you can see, and I made a decision. I decided I was going to do this. Not for my friends that were waiting over an hour for me, not for the employees who wanted to kill me, but I was going to do this for myself. I wanted to live a new life. I wanted to put behind me that girl with all of those fears. And so I took a deep breath, terrified, and I jumped. And the minute I jumped off, I felt tingles literally from the tops of my fingers all the way through my entire body. There's a little boat that comes to pick you up after the jump. And when I got into the boat, the guy in the boat who I'd never met before looked at me and said, "It can be an exercise in spirituality and mindfulness, can't it?" Like, whoa, you just read my mind. After the jump, I meditated for a bit, and then I wrote this. A year ago, as the girl that ran audits and finance for her company, I never would have thought like this. But I wrote, "I've decided to live a life where courage is more important than fear. In a few months, I will return to the US, and I will live without fear." And I clicked post on Facebook, and my entire life changed. At this point, having jumped off a bridge, I was ready to conquer my internal fear. Oh, for good measure, I should say, I did change into shorts because it was hot at this point and do another jump with a lot less fear. I came back to the US, and I met with a venture capital firm in one of my first few days back. And he asked me, this venture capital partner who I really wanted to work with, "How was your trip? Did you change at all?" And you know, the old me would have figured out what I thought he wanted to hear. And I would have said, "I learned how important work is," or something awful like that. But you know, I paused, and for the first time, I did something I'd never done before. I was totally honest with someone I wanted to impress. And I said, "I learned how to meditate, and I think every entrepreneur and VC should meditate." I walked out of there, admittedly, a little bit scared. But the next day, he emailed and said it was the best meeting he had had in memory. You know, I used to be afraid that people didn't like me, even my friends. Now I've gotten to the point where I can like someone, even if they don't like me back. Hopefully that's not all of you. But that's freedom. It also means I can be silly, and I can be funny. I can be myself. I can try to be funny, I should say. You know, I also used to be afraid to ask favors of people. I thought maybe I didn't deserve them. But when I was coming back to the US, I was heading right to LA, and through LinkedIn and Facebook, I emailed got to an executive at Paramount and asked a big favor. And he ended up getting me onto the set of my favorite TV show of all time, Glee. I should be afraid to admit that. You know, I used to be afraid of confrontation, but now I can speak my truth. And if somebody has a problem with that, if they don't like me for it, that's okay. I like myself at this point, and I don't need anything from anyone else. So I can tell you that this journey got me to a very tangible result. I can walk on my own now, whether I'm in Fiji, where I ended my world travels, or in New York, or in Paris, too. But look, I can't sit here or stand here and tell you that you need to bungee jump to be free, or you have to move to Asia for a year, because not everyone can do that. But I do want you to think about 3 things. The first is mental agility. You know, we have these habits, like a lot of my old habits, that are basically just that. They're just habits. They're like grooves on the record of your personality, and they get deeper over time. What if you can think about breaking those habits? What if the way you've always acted isn't the way you should be acting? I'll give you an example. In tennis, I have a really good backhand. So if we're at game point ever, you know, if I get stressed, I'll just run around the court and try to hit backhands as often as possible. But if you can add a new stroke, a forehand or a net shot, just like you can change your reactions to things that happen in your daily life, you'll actually have a better game in tennis and in life too. On fear, think of something you've always been afraid of, and then think, what if I break that? What if I overcome that fear and open up a new neural pathway? And finally, as you just heard from Andy and Rich, most importantly, mindfulness. I define mindfulness as being aware, seeing the truth. Take the time not just to get connected to everybody else, but to get connected to yourself. Learn what your drivers are so that you can then think about how you can break them and act differently. Your mindfulness practice could be being quiet and focusing on your breath for 3 breaths, if that's all you have time for, or my own practice, which is 20 minutes of meditation twice a day, every day. I think being mindful has made me a lot more authentic and fearless, whether it's jumping off a bridge or writing a funny email to someone. So I'll tell you, the first time I ever spoke publicly about fear was in Las Vegas. And at the end of the talk, I challenged everyone to join me in overcoming fear by jumping off the top of the stratosphere in Las Vegas. A group of us did it, a big group of us did it. We can only go 4 at a time, but a big group of us. And a bunch of people said it changed their life. They went on from that jump to overcome fears they had held their entire life. Okay, no. I don't think Loic and Geraldine would be very happy if we all left here en masse and went to jump off the top of the Eiffel Tower. But I will tell you, if I had a bungee jump off of it, I would probably do it. That said, there's one fear that I'm still working to overcome. I've been afraid to work again. But I can now stand here and tell you that I am once again becoming a LeWeb person like you guys. I am starting a new company. I'm in the process of building it. I'll probably, hopefully, use some physical agility in addition to some mental agility to grow that company. And I hope that you guys will join me in spending a little time being mindful, a little time in meditation or nature or whatever you need to get connected to yourself. So together, we can all live a bit more mindfully and much more doing of living without fear. Thank you very much.